Kia ora mai tātou, everyone. Welcome. No mai haere mai. We are here at the Long-Term Plan Annual Plan Subcommittee on the 30th of October. Please feel free to take a moment to read the emergency procedures on the screen. If you do have your mobile phone on, please switch it to silent mode. And for anyone who is joining us via online, please make sure that you have your microphone off. And if you do have a question, raise your virtual hand. That's a $1 for the jar. Whose phone that is? No. Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll move straight through to opening karakia. Please feel free to join me. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara kitai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, hei huka, hei hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Moving through to item 2, which is apologies. I've received an apology from Councillor Tupou and also noting that Councillors Barrett and Mitchell will be late to the meeting as well, and acknowledging that we have Joe Miller who is attending via Zoom, who's just joined us. Now, there may also be some early departures, but we don't need, I think, Councillor Brown and, is there one other? Just Councillor Brown, who may need to leave early. But I'll move that the apology be received for Councillor Tupou and move the apologies for lateness as well. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Lewis. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Public comment. We have no one here who wishes to speak with public comment except for Mike Fisher, of course. So Mike, please come forward. You're representing the Batoni Steering Group and you're speaking to item 5C, which is the Batoni project, and you're also wishing to speak to the draft long-term plan progressing decisions in respect to parking. So I'm happy to give you 5-6 minutes to cover both if you like. Feel free, if you wanted to separate the two, we can do Batoni Steering Group first.
Yes, I can do that first if you like, okay. And then just follow on. It shouldn't take too long, hopefully.
Great. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and Councillors. I just really want to speak on to do with the Batoni projects as a member of the steering group. Just really not going over old ground, but just really perhaps to reinforce some things that I feel are important, and hopefully a compromise can be reached where we can all be winners. We all recognise that we haven't got enough money, and so we've got to cut our cloth to suit the situation. Ideally, I would like to see a focus on the Esplanade. The Esplanade projects, including work on the entrance to the wharf, I feel is the greater priority of the three main project areas, the others being the library area and the grandstand. I feel the focus on the Esplanade area, and in particular that central area at the base of the wharf, is critical. It provides future opportunities and possibilities, not just for the community, which I think would very strongly look to see action in that area, but also for the wider city and region. And I just feel at times in the discussions that the sight of the greater picture of the benefits to the wider city and region in particular are sometimes overlooked. But it's a big area, it's a big factor, and I think we need to consider not just the aspirations of the community, but the future possibilities for the whole region. So I believe that an investment in the Esplanade area is the greatest priority, followed by the library and grandstand in that order in terms of priority, and to cut our expenditure cloth to suit. I'd like to see the cost that's been mentioned and highlighted of $6 million for demolition of the wharf taken out of the bucket of 20 million that was proposed, so that the full 20 million can be spread around those projects, and that perceived demolition cost is taken out. Petoni's community want to see a fair bite of the cherry or the pie, whatever we want to call it. And I feel that if we can spread the load across those 3 projects, they will see that we've gained something from the long-term plan. We know we can't get everything we'd like, but in the ideal situation, I think that we need to look at that. We also need to make sure that all opportunities are investigated, be it partnerships for any of these projects, so that any opportunity to lessen the cost to the ratepayers could be explored. And I feel that that's an untapped market still. A lot of people are not fully aware of the situation. They might be about the wharf, for example, but not so much about the esplanade, the grandstand, and the library. And so there's untold opportunities there, I believe. I was sitting in the car just before I came in, and I tried to think of something that would sort of round up the argument. And I wrote down, the past can be utilised and enhanced to provide for Petoni's future, but not just for Petoni's future, I think also critically for the city and region. So that's what I'd like to say on the projects. That was good timing.
Thanks, Mike. We'll hold there,
Right.
just so if there is any questions, and then happy to give you another 3 minutes, no problem.
Thank you.
Is there any questions for Mike on those comments? Councillor Dyer.
You're keen to get your thoughts on, you're sort of saying we should still do the demolition of the wharf, but still spend a significant amount of money on the gates to a wharf that may not be there in the future.
No, what I'm saying is ideally, one of the steering group's options, without going into the great detail, was mothballing the wharf. So what I'm saying is I'd be perfectly happy with mothballing the wharf, but spending and not having a demolition cost included, if you like, in the amount that had been suggested for the Petoni projects, so that money can be utilised for the esplanade and the frontage of the wharf area, and perhaps some form of the original or the first stages of the wharf, if that makes sense. But I'm not saying demolition, i.e. physical removal, and I'm also saying to take the cost that's been earmarked for demolition out of the potential 20 that was suggested as for these projects. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Thanks for that clarification.
Councillor Briggs.
Thanks, Mike. So reading through the report and listening to your comments, it's helpful. One of the things that I'm still sitting with is around the mothballing approach. And what does that actually mean? And whether we're providing our community with kind of false hope, or are we just waiting to what naturally falls into the harbour? And so wanting to get that clarity from the steering group around what does that mean and what's your understanding from the steering group perspective?
There may be differing opinions in the steering group, but from my perspective, the wharf as it's standing at the moment with gates across it is effectively mothballed with some minimal maintenance perhaps going on. So it's really the status quo, I guess, if you like, to make sure that that the safety aspect of where those gates are is there, and that the parts that can be perhaps retained or restored at the moment can be within that pot of money I mentioned, rather than demolition and physically starting work to remove an asset.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Mike. So when you say prioritise the esplanade, you mean mothball the wharf and work on the esplanade?
Work on the pathways, enhancing the esplanade, signage, anything we can do to improve its state from what it is now, knowing that conceivably in due course there's going to be the spin-off effect from cross-valley connections, but interim steps that we can take to enhance pathways, parking, beautification, signage, connections across the esplanade, anything like that we can do, yes. And in particular, in the area around the head of the wharf and from there. So in other words, what would almost be the meeting point of the various cycleways and connections to Jackson Street.
Just a follow-up question. Is the reason you want to mothball it because of the 6 million cost to demolition it? Why would we not?
Well, I mean, speaking personally, I would say that I would want to protect the wharf, and if that means mothballing it in the meantime, then that is better than spending $6 million or some other amount to demolish the asset and have it gone forever and take away that opportunity. I feel that it's better to spend that money elsewhere. If you want to call it deferring a decision, I guess maybe that it is, but I prefer to say it's mothballing it and saying, if we're going to spend $6 million demolishing, surely that could be spent in better ways in enhancing the area.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, we'll move through to the next item you're going to cover. Thanks.
Hopefully the other one's easier, but probably just as contentious, and that is the proposal of parking fee increases in Petone. I think this is probably shot under the radar in the depth of the report, but I just happened to pick it up, so I'm speaking in this wearing a resident's hat, and that's on page 112 onwards of your papers, I believe. So the consideration being given to paid parking in Petone and recommending consultation through the LTP. And it just raised some questions that I wasn't actually sure of the answers, whether we were talking just in Jackson Street or wider in Petone, and if it was wider, exactly what boundaries might that be? And also, it's mentioned that the additional funding collected from Petone parking could be used to make improvements and upgrades to transport infrastructure in Jackson Street. Now, could be, should be, and would be might be different answers. So my queries would be, I wonder how much that money would be, and could it be used for other things that the community might prefer. I'm not saying that we wouldn't want improved transport infrastructure in Jackson Street, but it was just a little bit vague. So I think there'd be quite a bit of protest about paid parking in Petone, even if the revenue was ring-fenced for certain things. The retailing situation there is fairly precarious at times, following on from COVID and just the hardship that of the economy at the moment. I think that if we look at adding paid parking in there, it may work for in some respects, but I think many retailers might view it as the final straw, and a lot of people who shop there from out of town or come there to use hospitality during the day would balk at the chance. It is a real selling point for Petone that it has free parking. If the paid parking was in certain areas, for example, like some of the off-street car parking areas, then that might be a possibility, or perhaps targeted to reduce commuters parking long-term closer to some of the stations, etc. That might be acceptable, but I think it's definitely good that it's going out for consultation, but I was just flagging, in my opinion, definitely not in favour of it. I think you'd be shooting the goose that's laying what's left of the golden egg at the moment if you had paid parking in Jackson Street.
Any questions on that? Councillor Mitchell.
Parking on Jackson Street currently, Mike, I think it's mostly 60-minute parks, free parks. They're 60-minute parks.
It is, and it's fairly well patrolled with the parking ambassadors, keeping a very close eye that people aren't staying too long.
So, and the proposal was for a $3 an hour charge. Do you think for someone who's going to come to Petone from outside of the Lower Hutt, for example, for a lunch, as you mentioned, that $3 is really a significant barrier to them still coming?
It may be for some, it might not be for others. Others would say, well, I'm going to Petone, I'm going to do a number of things, I'm going to park, and if I can get a park that I can stay longer, and I will, even if it's 2 hours or what have you. But I just think I don't think it's the right time to be introducing another charge. And if we can avoid doing so, this would be one that I'd say, no, I don't think it's the right timing for it.
Yeah, I think, and this is of course early in the process, but I think the challenge for us is if we are to do the upgrades, particularly to our transport network, that probably is expected from our community, that charge has to be somewhere. And the question is whether you collect it through the likes of a parking fee revenue, or you simply put it as an additional burden on our ratepayers through rates. That's the challenge we've got, and I know you'll understand that. So thank you for raising those points now, and I think there'll be some robust debate over the coming months. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so we'll move through now to conflict of interest declarations. Do we have any conflicts from members to declare? No, I know we have got a lot on this agenda, so again, do feel free if you notice something and you sort of thought, oh, maybe in reflection there could be a conflict there. Do feel free to raise it through the meeting, just because we're covering such a broad range, but we've got none declared at this point. Okay, so moving through to item 5, which is recommendations to council, and item A, which is the draft long-term plan progressing decisions on the financial aspects. This is on page 6 of the agenda, and I'll pass it over to Jenny Lipschitz, CFO, to speak to a presentation. Just to give you an indication of how we will work through the meeting, as Jenny will do this presentation, we will then look to move to the Three Waters 5B paper, and we've got the Wellington Water team here as well, so we'll get that information presented. We'll then look to try and get through the papers which are in front of us today before coming back to the table which is there and making some decisions. So we'll try and get through the information, questions, and then have all the decisions towards the end, just to allow some people to get away, but also to ensure that we've received all the information, discussed it before we start to make those calls. So I'll pass it over to Jenny.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there should be a slide presentation coming up shortly. In Diligent on page 275, you can see the slide pack there as well. Okay, so this presentation basically provides an overview of the finance aspects that are in the papers today. First up, in terms of our high-level timeline, we've obviously had a number of meetings already and progressed decisions. Today's focus is on budgets, so what's going to be in our draft LTP and what's going to be out. And there's some tough trade-offs and priorities that need to be worked through for those decisions. We also need to work through the funding mechanisms for those budgets. So we'll be looking at rates, revenue, scenarios, fees and charges, and so on in terms of funding those budgets. This meeting today is really a first cut of those trade-offs and priorities, and then on the 27th of November there's another meeting where we really want to land the decisions on budgets. After that, we really work through all the consultation items, the engagement process with the community. We've got an external audit process and so on that we'll be working through. Okay, so we've got a really challenging context for this LTP, as you'll be well aware. Challenging economic climate, particularly driven by high inflation and borrowing costs. We've got an infrastructure deficit, many aging assets that require significant investment. We've got borrowing capacity constraints, limits on our debt capacity, and there's a real need to prioritise our investment choices. Just recently, we had Standard & Poor's credit rating agency adjust our rating from a AA stable outlook down to a AA negative outlook, and that's reflecting really that much higher debt projections that we had in our last annual plan and the many cost pressures that we're dealing with in this current economic climate. There's also affordability constraints that we really need to carefully consider. So we need to be careful in our choices and consider what we ask the community to pay for given the economic climate. So there's some really critical, difficult choices to be made in the investment decisions, and we've got to balance it up against financial sustainability and rates affordability as we progress through these decisions. The agenda papers have got information about water services reform, some modelling around whether water's in or out. Obviously, it's a challenging time currently with the general election, and we're waiting to find out what's going to happen in terms of the water services reform legislation. At this stage, the agenda focuses really on the scenario where water continues to be our responsibility. That's the tougher option, and our focus is on trying to navigate through that tougher choice. The slide there's got a summary of our base budget review process. So we've been through a really detailed process off the back of earlier decisions by Council. We have adjusted our budgets for any unavoidable cost increases, for example, the transport contract changes that were recently approved by Council. There's still some further information to come through to us. So we've recently received from Wellington Water the OPEX advice, and that's included in the papers today. But the CAPEX advice is still being reviewed, and we're still working through that. So that'll come through to the next meeting. There's also other items where we're waiting for further information. For example, the Greater Wellington Regional Council bulk water costs, Riverlink, and there's some fee reviews that are still being progressed. So the agenda papers today have basically got 3 different rating scenarios. There's a 8.9% rates increase scenario, and that is basically year 2 of the annual plan, 23-24. The second rating increase scenario is a 13.9% rates increase, and that reflects basically including and adjusting our budgets to reflect all the unavoidable increases in budgets together with the Three Waters OPEX budget changes. And then the third scenario we've worked through is a 20.7% rates increase, and that includes a number of all the budget bids, the proposed extra funding. It also includes the parking revenue, and that's obviously based on some assumptions officers have made around which options Council goes through. So I'm going to quickly whip through now what those 3 scenarios look like from a financial perspective. I think it's really important so that you understand decisions today, where potentially it'll land in terms of the rating impact overall for this draft LTP. Okay, so the first scenario with the 8.9% rates increase, and just working off the back of the base budget review process, so $1.8 billion capital program, $40 million higher than what we had in the 23-24 annual plan. And we've included in there the transport renewal program, recent changes to the cost of that, the asset review information that was agreed at the last meeting, and some council decisions around carryovers and so on. From an OPEX perspective, basically from the base budget review process, we've got an increase in overall budgets of $173 million over 10 years. The key changes there, the OPEX increase of $97 million relates to the Three Waters OPEX aspects, transport contract changes, insurance cost increases, IT base budget increases, etc. The other key aspect is increased staffing costs, so $27 million of increased staffing costs, and that relates to the revised organisational structure, higher market-related costs, and the impact of living wage adjustments. Fees and charges give us some relief with a $26 million favourable variance, and that's on some assumptions around changes and increases to fees and charges. And then finally, borrowing costs. So those have gone up by $78 million over the 10-year period, and that's obviously assuming that 8.9% rates increase. So basically what we're effectively doing is we're funding a whole lot of our OPEX costs through extra borrowings. So it's pushing up our interest costs even further. Also with the borrowing cost, we've obviously got a higher capital program, and also cost of funds currently in the current financial markets is higher than what we had in the last annual plan. Okay, so with that 8.9% rates increase scenario, including Three Waters OPEX, balanced budget, we push out our balanced budget position by 2 years, later than what we had in the last annual plan. We're running big, massive deficits for the first 4 years of the LTP, so over $30 million of operating deficits per annum. The projected debt levels, the graph on the right-hand side shows you a comparison, the blue line is the annual plan, the dotted line is the draft LTP, and the yellow line is the debt limits. So you can see our dotted line, that draft LTP is way up closer to that yellow line. And the graph on the left there shows you debt headroom we've got lots of reds there, down to only $32 million of headroom in 2029. So really, really challenging financial position, real concerns around whether we're setting a budget that's financially prudent and sensible, with all those reds and ambers sitting in our debt capacity there. Okay, so the second scenario, the 13.9% rates increase. So this slide here summarizes the key items that driving up the rates increase from 8.9% up to 13.9%. So interest costs, 1.6% increase, transport contracts, 1%, insurance, 0.4%, Three Waters OPEX, 2.7%, and so on. So that adds up to the 13.9%. And just briefly, the balanced budget position basically returns then to something very similar to what we had in our annual plan 23-24. And though we don't have those big deficits of over $30 million, they've reduced down to around $25 million. The projected debt position is much more lined up with the last annual plan. So we've got those two projected lines. The debt lines are pretty similar, and we've got a lot more headroom capacity there. So no more reds. We're down to a few ambers for a few years and then into green. So it's looking a lot more financially sensible and prudent. Okay, then finally the highest rates increase, the 20.7% rates increase. So this, in our papers, we've got a long list in table 3 of all sorts of proposed budget increases. They cover off transport, IT, emergency management, Indigenous biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So based on some assumptions around which way council goes on those, basically it adds up to a 20.7% rates increase. Council's obviously got a choice here with all of those items and can avoid that higher rates increase by not adding all that extra costs into the work program. Okay, so with a 20.7% rates increase scenario, just a reminder that that excludes any extra funding for Three Waters CapEx. So we've got a program there of $1.9 billion over the 10 years and $111 million higher than what we've currently budgeted. Balanced budget is similar to the annual plan, so breaking even 2030-31. And the debt projections, we've got no red in there. We've got some ambers for a few years, and then we move to green, so far more sort of financially prudent response. You'll also see in the graph on the right-hand side, the debt limits have also increased higher because we've obviously got that extra revenue, so there's a lot more space between that projected debt and the limits. Okay, so the paper basically talks through and summarises those 3 different scenarios and does a high-level early assessment of where they're landing. Obviously, the 8.9% rates increase has got much higher debt levels, those big operating deficits, and is not as financially prudent and definitely has significant risks around our Standard & Poor's credit rating. We have assumed also that with that scenario, we'd probably be looking for some big service cuts, potentially reducing staffing levels, cutting out some capacity and capability in the organisation to offset those increased OPEX levels, potentially also reducing our renewal of assets and taking on a higher risk approach there. So, and with those kind of changes, for example, cutting out staffing levels, that in turn will create risks around delivering a whole investment program and having enough capability in the organisation to do that. Okay, so the report's got a bunch of information around the projected rating impact for different property categories to give you an early indication of where that's looking to land. In terms of the 13.9% rates increase, average residential ratepayer would have an increase of $8.35 per week, and the average commercial central property would have an increase of $56.51 per week. On the 20.7% rates increase scenario, the average residential ratepayer would have an increase of $12.66 and average commercial central $86. Okay, Okay, just briefly a reminder about all the work that's happened previously on all the savings and trying to work through and make sure that we've got, efficient, tight budgets. So a lot of work happened through the last LTP, the last 2 annual plans, where we literally went line by line and trimmed out various budgets. We've also made assumptions around not having a fully staffed organisation, a 6% vacancy assumption that's baked into our budgets. For this LTP, we've been through detailed work again, and we're still progressing through that, doing further work right now. Over the last few weeks, we've identified $6.1 million of savings over the 10 years, and we've included that in the papers that are in here presented today. So that's a rating impact of about 0.4% that's baked in already. There's further work underway, and we're hoping for the workshop on the 13th of November that we'll present that information to you. It is really challenging, and we're really looking towards now service level cuts as the next area that we really need to focus on to try and make any savings. We've identified some kind of easier to swallow, easier to accept rates cuts that we'll present at the workshop. Those are looking at about a 0.5% rates reduction at this stage. So just to give you a level of where we're landing, it's not big numbers. It's not big chunky reductions in funding and rates reductions. And then finally, in terms of CapEx savings, we haven't focused our energy in the space at this stage because we're targeting the operating budgets. With CapEx, you've got to move a lot of CapEx out or delay it to have a real impact on rates increase. So, for example, to reduce rates by about 1%, we'd need to take out about $31 million in CapEx. So, and that would be pretty tough going. Okay, so just to finish up, so some really tough trade-offs and choices to be made through decisions over this meeting and the next one coming up. A real need to carefully consider investment choices, financial sustainability, and rates affordability as we progress through this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Is there any questions on the presentation that we've just had? I suppose my only broad question, Jenny, is how is this looking for other councils from your colleagues that I know you regularly talk to? I know there are similar challenges, but just any thoughts on that?
I think generally everyone's really struggling in the current economic climate with cost pressures. Some councils have got bigger numbers than what we've got. Yes, it's early stages, obviously, of preparing the draft LTP, but there's really big challenges across all the councils as a general comment.
Thank you. No other questions? Joe, any comments you'd like to make?
Just, Mr. Mayor, in relation to your last question, speaking with Tai Tuatara colleagues, obviously everybody is working from where they start and trying to work down, if you like, but some people have started as high as 40 and 50. And what's for sure is water is at the heart of it.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'm just going to move to Standing Order 10.4 in regards to Presidents of Business. So item 5B, Three Waters draft long-term plan, and 5C, Petone project options. So I'd just like to move those two items forward, with the first one being Three Waters paper. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Stallinger, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no, declare that carried. Okay, pass it over to you, Bruce. And this is on page 242 of the agenda.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The paper before you is a summary of Wellington Water information that was presented at the briefing on the 9th of October. There's only a few points that I want to make today in respect of this. Jenny has already said that the CapEx investment, while we have some details in here, we won't be coming back to you with that information until a briefing on the 13th of November. And that briefing will be looking at what we can actually fit into the into the budget, I suppose, in terms of our ability to loan these works. So we have got some information in there on what the maximum amount of work that could be done, that Wellington Water could actually deliver for us, but we don't have the funding to do that at this stage. So the OPEX investment requested has increased significantly, as you can see, with a $5 million increase in year one, with further increases requested over the 10-year period. Principally, these increases are due to four main factors, and those are set out in paragraph 7 of the report. While a reasonable proportion of these costs are unavoidable, such as the gas bill of $600,000 for the Seaview plant, Council does have options to cut back investments, such as in investigations and planned and response maintenance, where there are some sizable increases. One option that we looked at and put in the paper was to cut back on planned and reactive maintenance by $1.7 million. That would impact on levels of service and could result in higher bulk water costs. Cutting back on investigations wasn't considered as being optimal either, because that risks the ability to increase our renewal program. And you'll recall that one of the targets that we want to achieve is to increase renewals by 3 kilometres a year. Having said that, in terms of being able to do that, the capital budget seems to be constrained to a point that we wouldn't be able to do that anyway with capital. And in fact, we'd have to do it through rates increases if we wanted to invest in that program. So on balance, we've recommended the full year one investment, but have limited it in future years just to the standard adjustment for inflation, so not the increases that Wellington Water had asked for. So we've got Pete Wells and Kevin Locke with us today from Wellington Water, and they are going to assist me with any of your detailed questions.
Thank you, Bruce. Any questions for Bruce or the team that are here? Sorry, Councillor Dyer.
Thank you. A question on the bulk water charge. It says in the paper that the estimate's 13% increase. Is that because of the total? We know that the cost is proportion based on our usage within the region. Is that 13% increase because bulk water as a whole has increased, or our share of it has increased?
No, that's based on the overall projected increase that was put into the annual plan last year. So it's based on the information that is 12 months old. Greater Wellington is going through that process with Wellington Water at the moment and determining what that new figure will be. So we've just put that 13% in at this stage.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thanks, Bruce. There's a table on page 246, and it's in reference to what you mentioned, the maximum deliverable program and how much that would cost. You see, we don't have access to the money. We could have access to the money if we charged the average property $3,600 a year. What are we charging them currently for those? That's the targeted rates for water?
The targeted rates are just over $600, I think, for both water and wastewater, $650, $620, somewhere around that. So they're a lot lower, and at the briefing that we had a few weeks ago, I did focus on this aspect and say that the life cycle replacement of these assets, including the operating, etc., the amount that we charge as a targeted rate is nowhere near sufficient to maintain those assets over their life.
So to get to this figure in the paper here, 3,600, we'd have to multiply that many times for each of the 10 years in the long-term plan.
Yes.
Any other questions? Bruce, is there any comment you'd make in regards to the regional approach that I know the Water Committee is looking to encourage councils to take. Is there anything we should be particularly mindful of when it comes to the OPEX investment, or is that more around the capital investment decisions?
I think it's more aligned with the capital, and particularly in terms of looking at things like water meters, investing as a region. But yeah, I don't believe it's specific or pertinent to the operating.
Thank you. Any comments the team from Wellington Water would like to make? It's all been covered. No? Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll move through to the next, just a moment. Okay, so we will take the recommendations on this paper, which are in front of us. So recommendations 1 through to 6, which I'm happy to put forward. So do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Edwards. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Okay, moving through to Petone projects, project options. And I will ask Andrea if you'd like to come forward. Thank you. So Andrea Blackshaw, our Director of Neighbourhoods and Communities, is going to speak to the item, and then we will open it up for any questions.
Kia ora tātou, through you, Mr Mayor. We also have with us today some members of the Parks and Reserves team who've been working on the Wharves project for some time. So we have Corin Elliott and Andrew Broadhurst who can come up and answer any more technical questions if we need them. So this paper reports back on the subcommittee's request on options for how we might prioritise $20 million of investment in assets in Petone. Officers have worked with technical experts to provide some high-level costing options for each of the projects that are involved. So the Petone Wharf, the Petone Recreation Ground Grandstand and the Petone Library Building. And then the steering group has looked at those and come up with 4 different combinations for consideration. One of them prioritises retention of the wharf, so it's the mothballing option. One of them prioritises development of the esplanade. One of them prioritises development of the library building and the opportunity to pick up some of the town centre aspirations of the Petone 2040 plan, and one of them spreads the money evenly over the projects and puts the lowest amount against all of them. So these options are put forward for you to consider. There's a lot of detail in the papers about what these options look like and a lot of information around the costings, how they've been done, and also the risks. And so we're happy to answer any questions about them.
Okay, is there any questions from members? And just to foreshadow that, I believe Deputy Mayor, you've got some recommendations that you wanted to put forward. We don't need to do that right now. We can ask questions on the basis of the paper, but that reflects the steering group's position as well. So, but we can cover that off shortly. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I just had a question for, seeking a bit more information about the process today. There's been a steering group in place and the paper refers to workshops, public workshops, I think. So I was just curious kind of how many people have been involved from the Petone community thus far. I think it was mentioned in public comment. Most people are probably aware of the issues with the wharf, but not the grandstand and not necessarily the library either. So just kind of curious how big the conversation has been to date, and will this be carried forward and kind of consulted as its own thing in Petone? Or will it just be from here on and part of the long-term plan consultation?
So the Petone project itself started, I think it's about a year and a half ago, and that brought together all of those projects within Petone to be considered as one project. There are a couple of things that have happened as part of that. There was some engagement on the library building right at the start, which was only about the library building, but looked at the broader Petone 2040 outcomes and how the development of that building could contribute to those desired outcomes. And I can't recall off the top of my head how many people took part in that one, but it was over about 6 weeks, general community, and we got a really good response. Then as part of the ongoing work, there were 2 community workshops which were with identified key stakeholders in Petone, and I think about 25 people were invited to 2 workshops, which one focused on the Esplanade and Wharf opportunity, and one focused on the Library Town Centre opportunity. So those 2 workshops, we had a briefing here. You might recall we had the big map up on the wall, and we had a report that came out of that as well. So among, I think definitely the library opportunity is probably pretty well known. The fact that these 3 things have been brought together in one conversation, probably not as well known, but that would need to be communicated, and that's the way it would be consulted on through the draft long-term plan.
Any other questions? Councillor Dyer and then Councillor Briggs.
The paper talks a lot about the cost to do these projects. Obviously with the library, with option 4, which is on page 261. If we were building new, it's to cost 16 million, but I imagine there'd also be an element of money coming into council if we were to partner with Kāinga Order or Urban Plus. Some of that 16 million would be offset by leasing or selling the space above a new facility. But the report doesn't really talk about that.
If we were able to do a joint venture, there would be more than council putting funding in, but I think the view of officers would be it's unlikely that if we want the building to deliver on the outcomes that we need, that our contribution could be much less than what we've stated.
So 16 million would be our contribution to potentially a $30 million project to do more. Cool, thank you.
Councillor Briggs.
Andrew, just around the proposed budget proposal 1, the prioritising the wharf option and mothballing, is there any more information that you can provide from officer perspective around other partnerships? Obviously in there it's got until more funding was to come from a future LTP round, if there was a partnership or waiting for it to become in disrepair. And so that partnership space, what does that mean, and what are those opportunities, and what's been kind of noted that could be actually progressed?
I think the paper notes that it seems highly unlikely that the money would be prioritised in future LTPs, given the situation that we're currently in, the financial challenges that we have, and that they're not likely to ease significantly. So I think that though is a decision for elected members to make if that was to be prioritised later on. In terms of partnerships, again, nothing's been explored, and I'm not sure that there are many opportunities there, but I think that the sentiment of the steering group was that they wanted to give the wharf every chance, and so that was the thinking was whether even if there's not much chance of future funding or not much chance of a partnership, that they would like the opportunity to explore it.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, and this really follows on, and you probably answered half of it. My concern is, and I have to ask, was any discussion held around the fact that by mothballing it, there could be, or it surely would be, leaving it open to further deterioration, which is going to cost a lot more money?
Yes, that was discussed, and officers provided some advice on that. And I think probably mothballing it rather than seeing it as a status quo, which I think how it was described previously. I mean, in reality, the wharf deteriorates every day, so it's not really status quo. It will eventually, if nothing's done, bits of it will break off.
Councillor Mitchell.
Just as a follow-up to that, there's a figure quoted in here, $6 million for demolition. I'm assuming that's a controlled demolition. If a big storm or an earthquake dumped half of that wharf into the sea, would it cost significantly more to remove it than just doing a clean demolition?
Just going to look at the technical experts. No. Similar.
Thank you. And just in terms of what's talked about in this paper in terms of demolition, there's a note in there somewhere that talks about based on experience with other wharves, you might have to retain some for bird roosting and things. When this paper talks about demolishing the entire wharf and sets aside a figure of $6 million for that, what's left there afterwards? Is it a complete removal or is it some kind of ruins?
So what's left is a ruin, which is what we're having to do at the Point Howard Wharf, and it'll be longer. It'll be, I think we said in an earlier paper, about 80 metres of a structure left, which is to allow roosting and habitat for birds. And so there would be a ruin left, which in itself has some heritage value.
Any other questions? Councillor Morgan?
Kia ora. Can I just ask, is that 6 million figure still pertinent right now?
Yeah, that was revisited as part of this exercise. That said, there's a lot of risk around those numbers, and consenting and will be a big part of the cost of demolition as well. There's a lot of risk around that whole project. So while the numbers are provided for this exercise, certainly things could change around it being restricted to that cost.
Councillor Brown?
So budget proposal number 2 has the demolishing of the entire wharf and focusing on the esplanade with a viewing platform. It has the wharf option as 10 mil, so that would be leaving 4 mil, to do the viewing platform and the whole esplanade. That seems pretty modest.
It wouldn't be the whole esplanade. It would be what's possible within that much money.
Right. Okay.
Okay, I think that does move us quite well to the recommendation that the steering group has come up with post the publishing of the papers. So I'm happy to pass it over to you, Deputy Mayor Lewis, and I believe we've got that. We can put it up on the screen for consideration alongside the other options which are in the paper. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks everyone for your questions and Andrea for the work on this. Yeah, the steering group have come up with a new option, and it was, well, mothball the existing wharf until either through the long-term plan a partnership or further funding can be found. And it was retaining, removing out of scope the $6 million. The reason behind that was $20 million for 3 major projects in Petone on its own is going to be hard to do, but $6 million out of that budget was going to make it even harder. So removing that. What else have we got up there? Agrees 10.2 million allocated for improvements to the wharf entrance, and that's the gates and just the landing aspect of having something to walk on, a bit like a viewing platform, and improvements to the esplanade. We did opt for the lowest options in option 3 for the library, 5.6, and the grandstand, which came into the frame just recently, 2.4. And in that option there with the grandstand, it was to do it in partnership with the clubs involved. There are people in their club that have the expertise and are working currently with council. So it was getting those partnerships going within our community for things we value. So those were the proposal we put forward.
So just if we could leave that on the screen, I think it would be helpful. So just for clarification, so it would be a recommendation and also making the point that this is not a final decision time. We obviously still have to go through our entire process, and also even for the draft LTP, there will still be a time for us to have to compare all options and maybe make some tough decisions. But just here, so as you were saying, Deputy Mayor, option B in this is acknowledging that if there is a requirement for demolition due to safety issues, that $6 million would need to be found elsewhere, basically, just so we're all on the same page. Yeah, outside of that $20 million budget for these projects. So that's, I think, the main variation, I would say, to some of the other options. Councillor Shaw, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Briggs.
Just some clarity on this, number 5, grandstand. You've reduced the amount from 4.8, or halved the budget for the grandstand. So what will actually be missing from the grandstand with the budget halved?
So my understanding is it's the taking half the grandstand off the top part, leaving the bottom part as is, and doing a lightweight cover and seating.
And the intention to bring partners in to help with that, local clubs and that, would be just for the 2.4, not, for that part of it. Yeah. Is that feasible in that community, with the clubs that are there?
That's the conversations that need to take place. That hasn't taken place yet.
Okay, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Briggs, Councillor Brown.
Just a question really in terms of our approach with going out to consultation on the long-term plan. Is it our intention for us to choose one of these options, or is there going to be an option 2 that people can go, yeah, that's the one I like, not that one, or I'm just a little bit unclear what our approach is on this.
So as part of the long-term plan consultation, council is required to identify its preferred option in consultation. So in the consultation materials, it will say option 1 preferred, whatever that may be for each of the proposals. And then there will often be possibly 1 to 2 other options available for people to give feedback on as well.
So just getting clarity, I think I heard you, Mr. Mayor, but let's make sure I'm correct. So is this now the preferred option of the steering group as a whole, or is this the Deputy Mayor's alternative that she's putting forward? Just to have that clarity would be nice.
No, it was the preferred option following the paper that came out, of the group.
Yep. This is what Mike Fisher was speaking to earlier. Yep. Councillor Dyer. Oh, sorry, I did Councillor Brown and Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand this one a little bit better. So it's mothballing the wharf until further funding is found through this long-term plan. However, the 6 million for the demolition costs is to be found somewhere else if it gets into disrepair. But also wanting the 10 mil, I'm just a bit confused by that.
It's basically saying that the 20 mil, which currently includes demolition of the wharf, the ask is that that comes out, and that if the wharf needs to be demoed, that money would need to be found elsewhere within council. That's basically what it's saying. And then the wharf is being de-scoped from the Petone Projects group, so that the focus is on the Esplanade, the library, and the grandstand. Does that clarify? Yeah. Kind of. Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, just wanted some clarity around recommendation 2. Sort of what is included in that. Obviously, a big chunk of that is just the demolition costs currently, but you're asking for that money to come out, like the current.
So the full amount to stay in for the work on the Esplanade, the 10.2, with no demolition cost included in this. We got allocated 20 million to work on these projects.
Yeah.
And it was like, hang on, 6 million for demolition. That's not turning up anything for the community.
Yep, I completely understand pulling it out, which is recommendation 3. But recommendation 2 is the same in our papers on page 260 as W4, which says demolish the entire wharf and then rebuild a 500 square metre viewing platform. Is that the same as recommendation 2, but taking out the demolition cost, i.e. spending $10.2 million on a 500 square metre viewing platform?
That part is going to be the retention of the gates and the little bit of the landing out, instead of rebuilding brand new.
So it's closer to W3, which is keep part of the wharf out to the high tide line.
I think we're going to get ourselves a bit confused here. This is, I think, what is being put forward, and we've got the options in the paper as well if we want to ask questions of officers. But what is being put forward here very simply, is $20 million, or that budget, to go towards the Esplanade, 10 mil, the Grandstand and Petone Library, and the wharf is basically being de-scoped. And as the request is that the council then deal with the wharf, and the steering group focuses on those other areas. They would then, of course, need to come back with more detail of what those projects would entail, but that is a high-level budget figure. That's the request here. Yep. Councillor Mitchell.
Sorry, it does seem very simple, but the request to take 6 million out of the 20 so the 20 can be spent on the three other things. The three other things on there only add up to 17.5 roughly million. So is the intention to kind of rejig those figures back up to 20?
Yep. Did you want to comment on that, Jenny? Sorry, Andrea.
My understanding, and I wasn't involved in the most recent discussions, but my understanding is that this is actually requesting an additional 3.68 million. Does that sound right? Yeah, in effect, rather than 6, because it's taken a lower option on the grandstand than was previously included.
Okay, well, that's what the steering group's put forward, then it's a $3.6 million difference. Yep. Okay. So apologies for that confusion on the numbers. So sorry, yep, that's good to clarify that. Okay. So that's one option. Did you want to put that forward, Deputy Mayor? Put those recommendations forward on that? Is there any other questions or discussion on options that we want clarification on from anyone? Right. Again, this will come back to council. We're not making final decisions today. Councillor Briggs.
Is it possible to just have the recommendation tweaked a bit, tidied up before we vote on it so we know exactly what we're voting on? I've heard it now and I understand it, but what's been said doesn't reflect what that was on the screen just before.
I suppose if it could be bundled, as we spoke of, to the Petone steering group as that package, again, with the minusing that, with the de-scoping of the 6 million, which effectively works out at, what did Andrew say, 3 point? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get it sorted. Yeah, but we need to be really clear. The indication is that we are de-scoping from the steering group the wharf, so that will then sit with council of what we decide. Yeah. Okay. So we'll take 2 minutes and we'll just get the recommendations tidied up. Thanks. Okay, thank you, everyone. So we've got an option which we'll put up, and I do want to make sure that this accurately reflects the position of the steering group. It's important we consider that that's the option that's come forward. So I'm going to take a little bit of liberty with standing orders and just to get your indication, Mike, as well as a representative of the steering group, that this change does reflect where the steering group's at. Okay. It's another $1. What's that? Yeah. Okay, yep. Okay, so from number 5, which is notes the mothballing of the existing Petone Wharf until either further funding is found through the long-term plan or a partnership, or disrepair requires demolition due to safety issues. So that's there. And then it moves through to item 6, which is agrees to a total budget of 17.683 for the Esplanade, Petone Library and Petone Grandstand. And 7, which is notes that matters pertaining to the demolition, mothballing of Petone Wharf are de-scoped from the Petone project group and will be considered by council through this long-term plan process. Yep, it does. Okay, cool. Okay, discuss. Any views? Or it's been moved by Deputy Mayor Lewis. Yep. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second it for discussion. Councillor Briggs?
Just clarity on 6, just around it being the total budget for all those projects rather than, again, it's only a very small wording difference, but that's the way it could be interpreted as that much for all of those projects individually.
Yeah. What was the suggestion? I think it says it, but yeah, what was the suggestion? Okay, happy? Yep. Councillor Mitchell?
Sorry, I just had a comment on number 7 too, that says that notes that matters pertaining to the demolition / mothballing will be considered by council through this long-term plan process. Up in number 5, I think we're kind of being asked to agree to mothballing that wharf. Down in number 7, it kind of sounds like we're going to decide during this long-term process whether to demolish it or mothball it. So I think it could just be more clear.
Yeah, we could just make an amendment there, which is pertaining to the cost.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Any discussion? So it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Councillor Stallinger?
As much as I respect the work that's been done by the steering group and would love to see investments in all 3 of these projects, I'm just very conscious of the mood that's been set by some of the other reports and information we've had both today and in recent weeks and months. And what appears to me an inability to fund what we'd desperately like to put into our water services by way of renewals, the very basic essential services for our community. So, my view that I'm going to take on this and quite a few of the other recommendations or matters we have to consider increasing expenditure for is, are they more important than our water infrastructure? And unfortunately, in most cases, I'm going to come to the conclusion no. And if we've got any spare money we can find, I'd like to see it going, maintaining our essential infrastructure, water services and roading, and as well as perhaps addressing resilience and other matters of health and safety where we can. So unfortunately, I have to vote against this one. And if this is defeated, I would move that we take the lowest cost option for each of the 3 projects.
Okay. Any other comments, debate? Councillor Dyer?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We reluctantly mothballed this 12 months ago through our annual plan process to deal with it now in the long-term plan, which is our plan for the next decade. If we can't make a decision on it now through this long-term plan, then I think we're in a really awkward position. I think mothballing it just sends a really bad message to the community that we don't really know what we're doing with it. We haven't funded it. If we're going to fix it, if we're going to repair it, let's say we're going to do that and put that in the budget. If we're not going to, then let's just be upfront and say we're not going to. I think mothballing it just at this stage for the next 10 years, saying we might deal with it if we can find some money somewhere or someone comes along and wants to partnership with us. I just think it's just such a great area to leave us in. It also gives certainty to get on with the resource consent, which in the paper says could take up to 3 years. I mean, effectively, that's a 3-year mothball period where the wharf will still physically be there till it's demolished. We've all got strong attachments to the wharf, particularly people in Petone. It's a regional asset. But we've got to remember as well that Te Ara Tupua is under construction, will likely be finished before this even gets demolished. And that's going to provide far better walking, cycling, recreational use of our harbour, as well as much better fishing options than currently the wharf provides. Would we be spending this money right now if we had nothing there on a new viewing platform or new gates? If there was nothing there, we absolutely wouldn't. We're looking at potentially over 20% rate increase. And the thing I keep thinking is I wish we had more nice to haves in our budget that we could easily just scrub off and say there's some savings, but we don't. So we're going to have to make some tough calls, and this is probably one of the toughest of the day. But yeah, I can't agree with the mothballing of it. And I can't support the 10 point, the big number for the gates, which will go to nowhere. We'll start building the gates and the community will think, oh, the council's getting on to fixing the wharf, yay. And then we'll stop and they'll say, what's happening with the rest? And we'll say, oh, we're not doing the rest. We've just spent $10 million on the gates to nowhere.
Hold on a second. That is not what's being proposed, and no one has said that we're spending $10 million on the gates. So just be really careful, because from what I understand, it's the Esplanade, and and I think that was articulated pretty clearly. Obviously, there would be a whole heap of work to do of what the scope of that would look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's just be mindful of what we say here.
Okay, at least millions on new gates that will...
No, I don't think that's the case either, Councillor. And I think it's unfair to the steering group to be saying that. So let's just be clear. There will be a lot of work to do, and it would still have to come back to council.
Yeah, but it would be a decision for council to make, not the steering group at that stage, because we're pulling it out. But yeah, at this stage, I just can't support the wharf stuff. Yep, sorry.
Any other discussion? Councillor Edwards.
Well, at the risk of being a third person in the negative, I very much agree with Councillor Stellinger's approach to this. I agree with what Councillor Dyer has said about using the word mothball. For goodness sake, we've got to make a decision about this wharf. There isn't going to be a partner that is going to join us to refurbish this facility, much as we all love it and don't want to see it go. I believe it's had its day. And talking about mothballing and waiting for it to fall into the sea risks another agency slamming a deadline on us to get that work done because it becomes a safety issue. I think we need to make the decision once and for all that wharf is gone. Three Waters infrastructure, basic infrastructure, which should be our core function, should be our priority. I would like to see further exploration of what could happen on the library site, but yeah, in the end, the lowest cost option for grandstand, library, and I don't think we've got money to be refurbishing or I don't know, use the word tarting up, making improvements on the Esplanade. When I go down to Petone, I'm going down there for the water and the beach and the natural environment. I don't need platforms or things like that. And I think there'd be quite a few people who would take that view as well.
Councillor Shaw.
I think most of us agree that we would regard the Petone Wharf as an iconic piece of wharf in our beautiful harbour. And I do remember at one time listening to Liz Mellish talking about it being a real taonga for mana whenua. And I don't see, unless I've missed it in here somewhere, what their thoughts might be around here if it was to be mothballed or totally demolished. And I'd be really interested in hearing that before we have to make any decisions.
So just repeat that, the question you had there, sorry, Councillor Shaw.
Well, just in regards to, I don't see any reference here to discussions with mana whenua, because I know that it was just, the wharf was regarded as an iconic taonga for them. I'm really sort of reluctant to make any decision without hearing from mana whenua.
Gotcha. We can ask a comment from Andrea on that, but I just want to reinforce again, this is an indication we are giving for a draft LTP to consult and to engage with people on. But Andrea, did you want to comment on that particular point?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. When we had the briefing on the wharf earlier, we had our mana whenua representative, Richard Tioni, here with us, and he talked about their view on the future of the wharf, and their view was that while it was a taonga and it was highly valued, that actually in terms of where the money could be spent in Petone, that there were probably things that would have better outcomes for the community and for Māori than investing in the wharf. We also had a couple of mana whenua representatives involved in the workshops that we had. If you remember the report from the workshops as well, there was a general sense there that refurbishing the whole wharf was probably not the best investment of money for an investment in Petone, and mana whenua were in that conversation.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, really interested to hear that particular position, because I've kind of felt the way about this wharf for a while now, that there's probably better things we could spend the money on than reinstating Petone Wharf. So, and I kind of sit with Councillor Dyer on the fact that we did push it out to this LTP to make a decision, and mothballing doesn't feel like a decision to me. We're not sitting here proposing to get on and refurbish that wharf at whatever cost, and nor are we here considering demolishing the wharf. We're kind of pushing that decision down the road for another 3 years. I don't think in 3 years' time the next council will be sitting here so flush with cash that they'll put down 20 or probably 30 by then million on restoring Petone Wharf, and nor do I think at that stage it might be the best use of that money for Petone, for the position that we've heard from mana whenua as well, for the Petone community. So I kind of favour making a decision now, and given our budget constraints, my decision would be to demolish that wharf. So make that decision now, at least to go out to public consultation, and we'll hear back, I'm sure, from people who don't think that's the right decision, but maybe we'll hear from people who do as well, and part of that discussion can be what else money can be spent of in the Petone community. I'm not so fussed about the grandstand. I don't know a lot about it and how it's used and who benefits from it, but certainly the library, I would be reticent to take a lowest cost approach to that library. I think that we are in difficult financial times, and water stuff needs a lot of money spent on it, but it's not the right time to be stripping budgets for community assets for every park improvement we have planned or every library refurbishment we have planned. Those things are really important to our community as well. So, you know, strongly support spending money on the library, doing something with that grandstand there. My preference for the wharf is to make a decision now, go out to consultation, and have our community tell us whether we made the right decision or not.
Okay, and now Councillor Morgan, Deputy Mayor Lewis, conscious that we've had about 5 members speak against the recommendation, so but keen to hear views, but we will have to try and keep moving forward because we've got quite a big agenda. Councillor Morgan.
I'll be really quick then too. Yeah, I just do, it's really hard because it's such a passion project and it affects and impacts many people. But I think since I joined council for the last year now, this has been a discussion that has come up and we've talked about, and my preference would probably be is actually to sadly demolish as well and make a decision today. Thank you.
So speaking in support, and I do understand where everybody's coming from, but my position on this project hasn't changed. I strongly support retaining as much as possible of the aspect of the wharf that we can. All consultation that we took place with the steering group and the community had this budget of $25 million to do the wharf. That was the thing in the room that everyone was against. A lot of people, even in the last consultation round we did on the wharf, wanted the wharf, but the budget line was too much. The steering group has tried to be pragmatic, and that was one of the biggest things that I asked to do with this project, and was to save our council and our ratepayers money. Hence the reshuffle of our priorities. But I'm very unhappy that our past isn't valued and that the outcome to this situation is demolition instead of investigating other avenues and partnerships to get more out of our iconic structures, of which Petone Wharf is on our heritage books. So for the community and the steering group and myself, the Esplanade and the wharf are very important, and we want to see the area enhanced and reimagined. With a huge investment by government supporting the 2 cycleway projects that are working their way round to Petone and the Esplanade within the next few years, the project steering group wants to give priority to the Esplanade for these improvements to take place. So we're ready as a city that's going to be looking good for the rest of the world when they come and visit and get their bikes and start travelling around our harbour. I understand I may not have the numbers around the table considering our current financial pressures we're under, but it's important that I ask that the money is included in this for this project to get the Esplanade done. It does seem a lot, but we have tried to save the council money by cutting back, by removing the de-scoping, and that was one of the reasons to do that, to mothball it in the hope that we could find someone else to work with. And that is something that focus hasn't gone on to by this group at the moment because we've only just come to this decision. So there is more work to be done, but if it's a conversation to start with, to go out to the community, I think this is it. Yeah, so for me, this project is very important, and I think we're doing all the right things by infrastructure and everything else, but to ignore part of our city that has given so much to make the city, there are stories to be told down there. Mana Whenua are involved and they want their story told in that whole Esplanade reimagining as well. And I think that's where the money's going to go. It will be a partnership with Mana Whenua. And the gates are so important. That's a symbol as well of heritage that has gone, but it was an industry that built our city. So I still support it, and I still would like this to go out for consultation and on the numbers that we're putting forward. Thank you.
Okay. So we do have a recommendation on the table, so we just need to deal with that. So I'll ask all those in favour say aye. Yep. Those
That's
against?
me.
Those against? So the motion has failed. What I'm going to ask we do is take a 2-minute recess, and I'm getting the indication that from members that you're wanting a decision to be, or a position to be put forward, because of course we're not making decisions till we consult, a position put forward around the demolition of the wharf, which will have an attached budget of around $6 million, so we can put that up as a draft up a recommendation, and then to consult on options for the library and the grandstand. So, and that will obviously need to have a budget attached to it. I mean, those are current assets. The only question I have for the room in just preparing this is there was a request around the Esplanade. So are we saying that there is no desire to do any work on the Esplanade? I suppose that's the only thing I just want to clarify. Yeah. I think, Councillor Edwards in particular, I think you were saying, yeah.
Personally, I wouldn't be averse to a small budget to mark in some way that this was a big landmark in our city, with maybe incorporating some aspect of the gates or some visual of, using glass or whatever of what the wharf used to look like. But
But not a $10 million budget.
Not a $10
So-
million.
So I think what we can say is that the officers go away to look at that consideration alongside the wharf and, alongside the library and changing rooms or grandstand. So we'll just take any other feedback before we draft that up, Councillor Mitchell?
Feedback, that sounds like what Councillor Edwards is proposing is budget proposal 1 in the paper here, which was...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. The only thing that's not quite there is, well, yeah, no, you are right. And we don't need to have a budget allocation for maybe the frontage and respecting the past.
Well, there is a budget allocation in there, 4.2 million set aside for restoration of short section and improvements to the entrance.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing though from the room is that we're wanting a minimum amount on the wharf but some sort of acknowledgement at the frontage there. Okay, so we'll just go and if we could just get something down, if you're happy to hold that, Councillor Parkin, was that?
Just to note that the budget proposal 1 still states mothballing the existing wharf, and I think that for me it would be better that we actually go out and consult on the demolition of the wharf. As hard as it is, if we actually say this is what we are having to look at doing, if we get the feedback from the community and the feedback from the community is no, we want to keep our wharf, then we hear that voice and we listen to that voice loud and clear. But this is the time that the community needs to step up and say, if they want to keep the wharf, they need to scream. And if they don't, then we have to go ahead with it.
We don't need any screaming, but they certainly need to have their voice heard. Yeah. I don't like Mike's screaming voice. We hear you. Totally get your point. So we'll just take a 2-minute recess and come back on this particular item. Thanks. Okay, thanks everyone. Now, we do have a recommendation to put forward, which is taking on the views of all the feedback. And there was also a helpful suggestion from Councillor Stallinger and officers around taking the items separately, just because there may be differing views on each thing. Okay, so that's okay. So this, the same, for completeness, we'll go to the top. So it's just the same two noting recommendations, 1 and 2, as before, in your papers. Moving down to recommendation 4, which is agrees to the preferred option, which will be the preferred option in the long-term plan, to progress with the demolition of the Petone Wharf and set aside a $6 million budget for that. 5, which is agrees to the preferred option of $5 million for the Petone Library, option L3 in the papers. Option 6, recommendation 6 agrees to the preferred option of $4.8 million for the Petone Grandstand. That's option G2. And the final one is asking officers to report back on options for a minor budget to acknowledge the history of the Petone Wharf. Won't be $1 million gates, Councillor Dyer. Yep. Okay, so does that accurately reflect our conversation of the view of councillors? Yep. Councillor Parkin?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure that it did, in that I actually thought that we're going for option 1 with the grandstand, i.e. the 2.4 million, which was the lower quantity. I also note that in the budget proposal 1, that was 4.8, so I'm, yeah.
I think the
not sure
2.4 was reflecting the steering group's desire to do that in partnership. I think a more realistic cost of, particularly if that partnership isn't possible, is a $4.8 million number. Andrea, is that correct?
I think the difference between options 1 and 2 in terms of the grandstand was that 1 is a repair and 2 is a new building. And the steering group's sentiment with the grandstand was that in terms of value for money and making sure that it's an asset that lasts a long time for the community, we're better to go for a new building rather than a repair of what's there, that would be better value for money. Yep.
Okay. So, and I think just with some clarity as well for the steering group, there is still an ability, if these are the budgets minded by council, to think about what that looks like. So it's yeah, we're being quite clear here on the budget amounts, but I think it's important that they can obviously continue to do their work and consider. Okay, so those are the recommendations. Councillor Stallinger.
My intention was to vote for the lowest cost option in relation to the library and the grandstand, but I did take I found that information useful, so be prepared to support that higher cost option there, slightly higher cost, and in the long term it's probably better value. I just wonder if we could get a couple of comments in relation to the library. The difference between the lowest cost option and what's proposed is internal layout changes, and excuse me if I haven't kind of read the papers close enough, but could we just have a bit more information about what we're getting for that extra money in that regard?
So on the library, the first option was for refurbish the existing building with no internal layout changes. So basically it's a repair. The building's got quite a lot of water tightness issues and the roof has been a bit of a problem. So that first number, which is 3.8 million, is a repair of the existing building. The second option, which is the 5, which is what's included here, is a refurb of the existing with some internal layout changes. So the spaces could be used differently and reconfigured for the building to work differently.
My question is for the money for the grandstand. That means a demolition. Is that allowing money for demolishing to have something new? Because it wasn't factored in. There was no cost provided for that. And the embedded carbon being lost as well.
I'm reasonably confident that that cost included the demolition, but I can check that out.
Councillor Salinger, you did have a comment or a question.
Yeah, just to follow up with a comment on following that reply. My preference would still be for the lower cost option for the library, so I'd vote against that.
Councillor Edwards?
Yeah, like I've just quickly tried to skim read the information about the library. Have we completely, if we were to go for this $5 million refurbishment, which doesn't really appear to future-proof us with approaching challenges for Petone, obviously, if we spend $5 million, it locks us out of investigations of a new building there with, you know, with a developer and us paying for one floor of it. We think we've investigated all the potential for that, and we're discarding that, are we? We're discarding that as an option.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. That option here is giving the indication that that's not. The one thing I don't want officers to do is that if there isn't a desire to do that, or if, you know, particularly, I hold a huge amount of weight on the steering groups. We set these groups up for important reasons in our communities. And if they're saying that that's not something they want to proceed with at this point in time, then I don't feel as if it's something we should do or spend any energy and time on if there's then going to be our community's view, which is in opposition to that. It just feels like a wasted energy potentially. Councillor Morgan?
Oh, Kia ora, can I just clarify, for that $5 million then, that would sort the water issues completely? Yeah. And the roofing, or, yeah.
It would sort the water tightness issues. It wouldn't give the opportunity to future-proof against flooding. Wouldn't include lifting the level of the building.
Councillor Parkin?
Sorry, Chair. Could I have clarification from officers about the steering group's information about the library site? My understanding of reading point 37 is that the community felt that the high density option was not an option 5 years ago, but is an option now. And actually the idea of investigating through Urban Plus or Kāingaroa was suitable at this point.
That was one person on the community, on the steering group. That was their opinion. It wasn't everybody's.
The steering group have put forward a recommendation, which was to do the refurbishment. So that's what I'm basing my view on. Yeah. Okay. We've got some recommendations here. I think, given there's a bit of confusion, and I would say that if everyone is in agreement, there's a very clear recommendation around the wharf that we're putting forward. That's pretty much settled. For the library and the grandstand, I feel like there's still a lot more work to be done with understanding what that looks like and options that come forward. But we are giving obviously a budget amount to that. So I think there are some options in this paper and they've been talked about, but there's, I think, a bit more work to be done around that. So as long as councillors are comfortable for more information to come back and giving the steering group the opportunity to, you know, that they're not locked in a certain position on those budget amounts.
Can I just have the recommendations up again, please?
I mean, an example for that is the demolition of the Petone grandstand. I personally am not sure if I support that option if there is an ability of say half of that 4.8 to go towards something scaled back with some additions to improving the facilities there or the likes. And I just like to, I don't feel like I'm in a position to make that call here today, but if the team want to go away and consider options within that budget amount, then I'm open to listening to that when they come back. If that makes sense. Yep, Councillor Stallinger.
Yeah, just feeling a little bit guilty because I suddenly realised I was probably indicating support, more funding for Petone grandstand than the library, and in my heart I probably feel more towards the library as being a more critical community asset. So I like what you're suggesting. I mean, personally, I'd like a bit more time to ponder those two and see what other advice the officers have.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
I just wondered if when it does go out to the public, will they realise that option 2 for the grandstand is to demolish.
I think that's what we're saying here is there's a bit more work to be done before we have our draft long-term plans. So
Okay, thank you.
I think maybe what we could do is just remove option G2 and the budget, which we're saying is 4.8. So just for clarification. So we're putting that budget amount. Yep. Okay. The library is a bit more clear cut. L3 is basically saying again that is a refurbishment and a bit of a redo to allow for the space to be used more. Okay, so the recommendations are there. Do we want to take them separately, or do we feel comfortable to take them as a whole? I'll put them as a whole. It's okay if we want to do them separately. So, okay, great. So option 4 agrees to the preferred option to progress with the demolition of Petone Wharf and $6 million set aside. All those in favour say aye. Oh, sorry, I don't have a seconder. Sorry. I'll move it. I'll move the recommendations. Are you happy to just second all of them, Councillor Dyer? Yep, okay. So for recommendation 4, all those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Would you like that recorded against Deputy Mayor Lewis, Councillor Shaw? Yep. Thank you. 5, which is the library. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. No. Yep. Okay. Recorded. Yep. Okay. 3, Councillor Stellinger, Councillor Park and Councillor Edwards. I declare that carried. Agrees to the preferred option of 4.8 for the Petone Grandstand. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Okay, I'll have to have a show of hands. All those in favour raise your hand. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not a hand, Councillor Barrett. No. 4. All those against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I declare that is not carried. Which. Okay. So we have no money for the Petone Grandstand now. Okay, that's fine.
No, sorry, are we allowed to do?
No, we can come back to that one. Okay. Option 7, which is ask officers to report back on options for a minor budget to acknowledge the history of Petone Wharf. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. No. And we just had the Petone Grandstand now to deal with. Is there a recommendation someone would like to put forward for Petone Grandstand?
Yes, that we run with the option of the lower amount to work with the 2.4, to run with the lighter weight roof and grandstand seating area.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Parkin. So that is $2.4 million for Petone Grandstand. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried. Now, just because everyone I can tell is like feeling, oh my gosh, this is all going up for consultation, consideration, and we will be making final decisions. This is not a final decision. So I know it will be really helpful once we get a steer from our community through that process. For all the officers in the room, I trust that each decision will not be this tricky. So, as we're gonna run out of time. But no, it reflects the importance of those projects, and we've got still a bit of work to do, clearly. So we will move now through to so we're going to move to the exclusion of the public for the items which we have there, and then we'll move back into public. So that is, so I'll move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the meeting: Fraser Park Sportsville update, funding request for transport budget. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay. We'll just give it a moment. Okay,